Bob Herbert's OpEd.tv is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation with the support of Ann Ulnick. Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. A frightening new book tells us that never in recorded history has the planet Earth warmed at the speed that it is warming now. One estimate says it is heating up 10 times faster than at any point in the last 66 million years. Global warming is a threat like none other humans have ever faced. We're hurtling toward a human catastrophe so mind-bogglingly immense that it is almost incomprehensible. And yet most people, including our government leaders, are barely paying attention. The title of the book is The Uninhabitable Earth: Life After Warming. The author is a columnist and deputy editor at New York Magazine, David Wallace Wells. David, welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks
really appreciate it. So if your book were a movie, the genre would be horror. I mean, the first line in the book is, "It is worse, much worse than you think." So give us a sense, if you can, of some of the really rough stuff from global warming that we're already experiencing, and then some of what's to come.
Well, right now we're at about 1.1 degrees warmer than before the Industrial Revolution, which may not sound like very much, but it means that the planet is already hotter than it's ever been in all of human history, which means no human has ever walked on an Earth that's as warm as the one that you and I are walking on today. And that means that everything that we know of as a species, everything that we know about the evolution of the human animal, the development of agriculture through that civilization, modern civilization, industrial civilization, all of that is the result of climate conditions we've already left behind. So we're in an unprecedented environment. And we can see that when we look at extreme weather and storms. Just a few weeks ago, Houston was hit by its 5th 500-year storm in 5 years. This term has been made sort of meaningless by climate change, but it was originally meant to describe a storm that was expected to be hit once every 5 centuries. 5 centuries ago, Hernando Cortez had just landed in Mexico. There were no European settlements in North America at all. So we're talking about a storm that was supposed to hit once during the entire period of time that Europeans landed in North America, founded colonies, committed genocide, fought a revolution, built an empire of slavery, fought the Civil War, industrialized World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, the end of history, September 11th, 2008. All of that time, we're expecting one of these storms to hit. And Houston's been hit by 5 of them in the last 5 years. The California wildfires are another very clear example. I recently spoke with Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles. He's 48 years old. The year he was born, 60,000 acres burned in California. The year he was elected mayor in 2013, it was 600,000, so a 10-fold increase. The year he was re-elected, 2017, it was 1.2 million, so a doubling in just 4 years. And last year, 2018, it was 1.9 million, so a 50% increase in just a single year. And he said to me, there's nothing we can do. There's no amount of firefighters we can hire, no amount of fire engines that we can buy, no amount of brush that we can clear that will stop this. The only thing that will stop it will be when the weather, probably long after we're gone, he said, returns to a more natural state. And these impacts are much more intense in the global south than they are in places like the US or Europe. Right. Already it's been estimated that many of the countries in the developing world have lost as much as 25% of their GDP because of climate impacts over recent decades. And those impacts are only going to get considerably worse going forward when that same differential between the global north and the global south, unfortunately, intensifies. We're just beginning to see dramatic climate impacts in the wealthy parts of the world, but the global south has been suffering from them for decades already. And there's even some scholarship suggesting that the social disarray and the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and even terrorism is a result of, in part at least, climate conditions in that part of the world, where today, every summer, there are at least a few days when the temperature and humidity reaches such a level it's approaching the maximum tolerable level for the human body. Wow. A few decades from now, that will be a regular occurrence, so much so that by 2050, at about 2 degrees, those studying it suggest that Many of the biggest cities in South Asia and the Middle East will be so hot you won't be able to walk around outside during summer without risking heat stroke or death. And these are cities that today hold 10 or 12 or 15 million people, which is why the UN believes by about that time, 2050, we should expect 200 million climate refugees. They think the number actually could be as high as 1 billion, which is as many people as live in North and South America combined. I think those numbers are a bit high, but even if you take the lower figure, 200 million, divided in half, you still get 100 million climate refugees, which is 100 times the number that left Syria and went into Europe and has completely scrambled European politics, which is why I think, in talking about this story, it's important to understand it's not just a matter of discrete climate impacts. How do we deal with sea level rise? How do we deal with droughts? How do we deal with the agricultural impacts? It's a matter of how these cascade through our political lives, our geopolitics, our culture, our relationship to technology and to capitalism. I think this is a quite fundamental story that we're all living through. It will define the 21st century. And we're only beginning to think about just the scientific impacts in a serious way. We haven't yet begun to think about some of what I think of as the questions for the humanities of climate change, which may be as profound, those impacts may be as profound as the direct climate ones.
So the Paris Accords have established, I guess, 2 degrees Celsius as kind of a global goal of warming that we should be trying to achieve or limit the increase to 2 degrees Celsius. Back, I think it was, the Kyoto Protocols were in 1997. It was said then that 2 degrees of warming would be we'd be on the threshold of a catastrophe. You say in your book that there's almost no chance we're going to hold it to 2 degrees of warming. So first, why is that your contention? And 2, what are the implications of that?
Well, I think the science says that if we completely stopped emitting carbon today, globally, we would probably expect about 0.4 degrees of warming to come just from the carbon that's already in the atmosphere. So practically speaking, we're already at about 1.5 degrees, right, even though we're really at 1.1 degrees. And what the UN says in their literature review says is necessary to avoid 2 degrees of warming, to safely avoid 2 degrees of warming, is a cutting in half of global emissions by 2030, which they say would require a global World War II scale mobilization on climate beginning this year. And that's because, we often think about the challenge of global warming in terms of electricity generation and power. And the challenge there is really significant, but it's only about 1/3 of the problem. And in fact, it's probably the easiest part of the problem to solve because we already have in the form of renewable energy a substitute that we can use to replace dirty energy. And in most of the world, renewable energy is now cheaper than dirty energy. In some parts of the world, it's even cheaper to build new renewable capacity than to continue running dirty energy capacity. And yet, just the logistical infrastructural challenge of replacing the entire world's electricity system in the space of a decade is incomprehensibly large. I mean, all of the electricity grids of the world would have to be rebuilt. And that's just the electricity sector.
And in the United States, we're going in the opposite direction. We're going backwards. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's true globally. Our emissions are going up every year. And in order to hit this, cutting our emissions in half target by 2030, we would need to not just totally reform our electricity sector, we'd also have to reimagine our infrastructure because if cement were a country, it would be the world's 3rd biggest emitter. China's now pouring as much every 3 years as the US poured in the entire 20th century. We'd have to reimagine our agriculture because animal protein in particular produces an enormous amount of carbon emissions. We'd have to reimagine our transportation. Every plane ticket on a flight from New York to London melts 3 square meters of Arctic ice. And of course, air travel is growing immensely around the world. We'd have to retrofit every single building on the planet because buildings give off carbon. The challenge, just at a kind of logistical level, is immense. It would require a total reorientation of our politics beginning today on the model of World War II to have a hope of cutting in half our emissions by 2030. And given all of the human obstacles we have, our politics, our economics, our culture, all of which are kind of aligned against action, I think it's really impossible to hope for that kind of scenario.
If if a comet were coming towards the Earth and it was predicted to cause this kind of damage, this kind of catastrophe, the world would be focused like a laser on what we could do about this. But of course, global warming, that's not the case. Why do you think there is so little urgency and so little attention paid to this problem by ordinary people, by our government leaders, and for the most part, folks like you notwithstanding, by media? Why is that?
Well, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head in the sense that at every level of society, there are obstacles to really reckoning with this. And it begins at the level of the individual. I'm someone who's spent a few years really deep in this research, and I still sometimes disbelieve the projections that the scientists are making because they are so large. They imply such dramatic transformations of our life. You know, whether or not we take action, the world will be defined by this force. Even if we manage to avert some of this warming, it will be because we have totally rebuilt our society to deal with it. So whatever path we take forward, the transformation will be total. And we basically have a tendency to not really, well, we don't want change. The economists call that status quo bias. But on some level, we also don't believe that that much change is possible. Right. We base our expectations for the future on our experience of the present day. And that means that we don't take seriously the idea that things could really turn dramatically. It's also the case that we don't want to look at scary outcomes. We've been trained, especially in places like the US, to believe that the future is a happy, prosperous place with future generations living better than past generations. It's really hard for us to break that. It's also the case that this news is relatively new. You know, we've really known about climate change for about 30 years in a public way. Scientists have known longer, but the public was sort of alerted to it in the late 1980s. And that's not all that long ago for a radically new understanding of our relationship to the planet to have sunk into public consciousness. On the other hand, it's really distressing when you realize that half of all of the emissions that have ever been produced in the entire history of humanity have come in that period of 30 years, right. So that we've done more damage knowingly than we ever managed in ignorance, and we're doing quite dramatic damage in real time. This isn't the legacy of generations. But I think that at the level of the individual, then at the level of the community, at the level of our economics, which tells us that we can make our mark on the world politically through what we buy and consume rather than through changing, systematically changing the structure of our society, and at the level of our politics, where so many leaders have been sort of captured by fossil fuel interests, and I think more to the point, have been taught by the world's economists over a period of a generation or so that action on climate was really expensive and therefore not really worth it when you measured it against the humanitarian costs, which up until a few years ago, economists said were actually quite trivial. Now, there has been a major shift there just over the last few years, where now economists are saying faster action will be better for us than slower action. In part, tragically, that's because they're raising their estimation of what kind of damage is possible through inaction, but also because they see great new business opportunities for, say, building new renewable industry and that kind of thing. And I think we're beginning to see that new conventional wisdom is just starting to shape our politics in a new way. But obviously, as at the individual level, our politicians have a status quo bias as well. And then maybe even most critically for me, the thing that I'm most worried about is the geopolitical level, which is to say that with a possible exception of China and the US, maybe depending on how you count India, no nation in the world is producing enough carbon that by taking action within their borders, they will meaningfully change their citizens' experience of the climate going forward. Most nations are responsible for only 1 or 2% of global carbon emissions. And so when you take a case of, say, Australia, which recently had an election where a conservative prime minister basically beat a liberal campaigning on climate action by saying it would be too expensive, this is a country that's today responsible for 1% of global carbon emissions. And they can take, if they took dramatic action, completely zeroed out on carbon immediately, but the rest of the world wasn't acting in unison, right, their citizens would be living with the same climate impacts 30 or 40 years from now. And that's true for almost every leader in the world. To a certain extent, it's even true for a place like the US or China, because it is a global problem, determined globally, and the impacts are distributed globally. So someone opening a new coal plant in India or China is going to affect the climate lived in by a citizen of California, And the action that's taken by a citizen in California is not going to be concentrated in his life. It's going to be distributed globally. And that means that there's what the economists call a collective action problem, which requires a coordination of global effort to make sure that we take some kind of action. Unfortunately, if you look at the Paris Accords or the Kyoto Protocol or the Rio Conference,
right.
At every stage when the world has tried to develop a global coordinated response to climate change, we've fallen into the same trap where we make pledges, we make commitments, and then almost no one honors them. So today we're just 3 years after the signing of the Paris Accords, right. And no major industrial nation in the world is on track to meet them. The only countries that are honoring their pledges are Morocco and Gambia. Every other country in the world is failing those pledges. We're now entering into a phase where most of those nations are supposed to come to a new conference in December and start negotiating more ambitious pledges. But honestly, I don't even know how to assess those pledges because the previous round, in fact, the previous multiple rounds, have all proven such catastrophic failures.
Given the reality that you describe so meticulously in your book, what is the level of warming you would anticipate, let's say, over the course of a lifetime of a very young person right now? How many degrees Celsius?
Well, I think it's hard to make predictions like that because so much of the uncertainty is about human action and what we do.
About what we do in response.
I think that looking over the course of the past year, we've seen globally, I mean, especially in the US and Europe, but truly globally, a kind of amazing, I would say unprecedented, and at one point impossible to imagine climate mobilization. There is incredible political engagement on this issue in a way that I've never seen before and certainly didn't expect to see this year. With the climate strikes, Extinction Rebellion in the UK, Sunrise here in the US, and we're beginning to see policy leaders talk much more seriously about the crisis than we've ever seen before, which means that I think some amount of dramatic action is possible. Unfortunately, we are truly running out of time to avoid disastrous warming. So if I had to make a kind of prediction, I would say something on the order of 2.5 or 3 degrees of warming is likely over the span of the rest of this century. But theoretically, I think we could keep things closer to 2 if our politics and policy moved really dramatically. And if we fail to take meaningful action, the UN says that we're on track for over 4 degrees of warming this century. And that's not even counting a lot of natural feedback loops that could be produced that could accelerate warming and sort of take it out of the hands of humans. At the moment, our hands are on these levers. We are driving the story. We are writing the story. It's our responsibility. But there are tipping points that we could pass at which, after which the world would be warming on its own and it would be very hard for humans to take control. And that's another argument for me why it's so important to take action so quickly so that we can at least retain control, even if we continue to sort of behave poorly when it comes to climate.
Given everything that you know about this issue, and given all the bad news that's all around us, you nevertheless remain optimistic about the way we may face or do something about this challenge. What keeps you optimistic?
Well, I think the most important thing for me is to understand that climate change is not a binary challenge. It's not a matter of whether we defeat it or are defeated by it. It's a spectrum of suffering, which gets worse the more greenhouse gas we emit, which will produce the more warming. If we can avoid some of that warming by avoiding some of those emissions, that counts as a victory to me. And so I think we often talk about this level of warming 2 degrees as though it's a test which we're either going to pass or fail. But I think that's a misleading way of thinking about it. I also think that the question of optimism is really a matter of perspective. And if you're hoping to preserve the planet's climate as it is today, when it's already been disturbed somewhat dramatically, still there's no hope for that. We're going to have significantly more warming than we have today. The question is how much. But I prefer to base my expectations not on where we are today, because I know that we won't stay there, but on the path we're on. If we continue operating as we do, we're going to get about 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century. That would mean $600 trillion in climate damages, which is twice as much wealth as exists in the world today. It would mean parts of the planet could be hit by 6 climate-driven natural disasters at once. It could mean we'd have twice as much war and half as much food. It would mean that we'd have a global GDP that was possibly 20 or 30% smaller than it is today, than it would be without climate change, which is an impact deeper than the Great Depression and permanent. I don't think we'll get there, but I actually think it's reasonable to base our expectations on that level of warming, because that is the path we're on.
Right.
I think we'll take probably somewhat dramatic action over the decades ahead to avert that amount of warming. And I count that margin, the margin between, say, 2.5 and 4 degrees, as an enormous victory. On the other hand, I also know that if we get to 2.5 degrees, we will be producing an amount of human suffering that I think is unprecedented in all of human history. One paper I cite in the book, and I think about a lot, studies just the impact of air pollution just between the 1.5 degrees of warming and 2 degrees of warming. And air pollution is not exactly a climate impact, but it's produced by the same thing that produces climate change, which is the burning of fossil fuels. So it's quite closely correlated. And just in that half-degree interval between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, just through the single effect, air pollution, it's expected that 153 million additional people would die. And that's the scale of dying of 25 Holocausts.
Wow.
And I think, practically speaking, it's inevitable. So it's complicated. I don't think that any holistic assessment of my own perspective would not say that I'm a deep optimist. I don't think that we can avoid
Right.
this amount of suffering. But I also think we have to be realistic about the world that we've made and where we're headed. And based on that course, I think there are a lot of reasons to see great progress. Renewable energy is much cheaper than it used to be. For the first time, it's now a viable alternative to dirty energy. Even 10 years ago, it would have been extremely expensive to try to replace our dirty energy sources with renewables. Today, not at all. It actually makes business sense to do that. There's progress in innovation on cement and zero carbon planes. We're not where we need to be on either of those things, but we're moving in the right direction. And as I mentioned earlier, the politics are really moving quite dramatically. When I turned my book in last September, we had never heard of Greta Thunberg. The school strikes had not expanded outside of Stockholm. Now, a year later, we've seen millions of people all around the world demonstrating for that cause. Extinction Rebellion had not started in the UK. Now they've forced a conservative British Parliament to declare a climate emergency and commit to zero carbon by 2050, which is not as fast as I would like, but much more ambitious than anything that's come before. In the US, because of Sunrise, which had not announced itself just a year ago, we have debate over the Green New Deal. We have Democratic candidates for president, each of whom are competing with each other to be more serious on climate than the last guy. And that is, it's incredibly exhilarating progress, considering that as recently as 2016, neither of the major candidates were even asked a single question at the debates about climate change. Now, I think this progress, this political progress, we're not moving fast enough, as incredibly fast as it has been. And we need policy change to really bring about dramatic action. But it's still a sign for some amount of optimism and hope, given that 2 or 3 years ago, we would have said that our politics were totally inert on climate. That's no longer the case, and I think that means that we're moving at least in the right direction.
I wish we had more time. We have to stop there. David, it's a fascinating issue, the biggest issue, I guess, to face humanity ever. And your book is a great place for everybody to start paying closer attention. It's called The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. The author is David Wallace Wells. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. The Democrats should be a lock to win the 2020 presidential election. Donald Trump is by far the worst president in American history, and the overwhelming majority of Americans know that. He's a liar, a pathological narcissist, a racist, and he's profoundly ignorant of anything having to do with governmental policies or the rule of law. So the Democrats absolutely should be a lock. But of course, they're not. Why not? For one thing, they don't seem to understand who their constituents are and what they really want. Democrats should give up their quest of winning over Trump voters, whoever they are, and concentrate on getting their own voters excited and involved. There are far more Democratic voters than Republican, but those Democrats don't always turn out at the polls the way they should. After all, even Hillary Clinton polled nearly 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. But her total vote in 2016 was 3.6 million less than Barack Obama got in 2008. For whatever reasons, those 3.6 million voters didn't turn out for Clinton. One way to depress the turnout is to push programs that a significant percentage of your own voters don't want, like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' insistence that they will get rid of all private health insurance in America. Earth to Warren and Sanders, that is a stone-cold loser. Another problem the Democrats can't seem to shake is their ambivalence about going after their most reliable constituency, African Americans. Black women vote for Democrats 90% of the time, but no candidate wants to look too black even as they're chasing black votes. Not even black candidates want to look too black. Barack Obama straddled race issues like a high-wire artist on stilts. Get over it. Democrats can't win without a huge black turnout. Finally, that word turnout is the be-all and end-all. What the Democrats have to do more than anything else is register their voters, blacks, women, Latinos, younger voters, Jewish voters, the LGBTQ community, and get them to the polls en masse. Nothing will be more important than turnout in 2020. That's all for now. See you next time.